No one showed up to the birthday of the paralyzed daughter of a millionaire CEO until a single father stepped forward and changed all their lives forever. The ballroom of the Riverside Hotel gleamed with chandeliers, each crystal throwing fragments of light onto the polished floor. Tables were lined with linen, silverware gleaming under the soft glow, vases of fresh roses carefully placed in symmetrical patterns. The scent of vanilla cake mixed with perfume that no one wore, and the air seemed too still, too hollow. It was a room meant for laughter, for clinking glasses, for applause. And yet it was eerily empty. Claire Morgan sat near the head table, her wheelchair pulled close to the edge, as if she were part of the celebration she had envisioned. Her dark hair was drawn back into a neat ponytail, the cut of her blue suit sharp, dignified. Her brown eyes, though gentle, carried a weight that shouldn't belong to a woman of 26. They lingered on the grand double doors as if, with enough will, they might swing open and reveal her friends, colleagues, or anyone at all. But the doors stayed still. The silence grew heavy enough to press against her chest. Her assistant had whispered excuses earlier. Storms, traffic, last-minute emergencies, canceled flights. Claire had nodded, her lips twitching into a polite smile, but she knew what those excuses meant. They didn't forget. They chose not to come. For them, it was easier not to confront the reminder of what her life had become. 3 years ago, Claire had been vibrant, unstoppable, at the center of every social circle. She had driven fast cars, made decisions in boardrooms with her father, commanded attention with a single glance. Then came the night on the highway, the headlights, the crushing metal. Her spine had been broken, her body altered forever. Rehabilitation gave her movement in her arms, strength in her hands but not her legs. The world shrank to elevators, ramps, polite stares, and whispered pity. Now, on the one day she wanted to reclaim some fragment of her old self, she was alone. She lowered her gaze to the cake before her, a masterpiece of layered chocolate and sugar roses. 26 candles burned brightly, a cruel contrast to the emptiness surrounding them. She inhaled deeply, preparing to blow them out alone, when the doors suddenly banged open. A man stood there in a white chef's jacket, his apron marked by faint stains of sauce and flour. His dark hair was damp with the heat of the kitchen, his posture strong, though weariness lingered in the set of his shoulders. At his side, a small boy of 4 clutched his hand, wide-eyed, curly-haired, his cheeks flushed from excitement. The boy's laughter echoed faintly into the vast hall, breaking the suffocating silence. The man hesitated, realizing he had interrupted something private. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice warm but cautious. "We didn't mean to intrude. We just saw—" He looked around at the empty tables. "Well, we saw no one was here. I'm Daniel Brooks, head of the kitchen. And this," he squeezed the boy's hand gently, "is my son Milo." He wanted to see if the cake really looked like the ones kings eat in cartoons. For the first time that evening, Claire felt her lips curve into something real. It wasn't the smile she gave cameras or business partners. It was small, fragile, but genuine. "It is," she said softly. "But kings aren't here tonight." The boy tilted his head and, with a child's fearless honesty, asked, "Can we sit with you?" The question struck her like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through her loneliness. She glanced at Daniel, who seemed ready to apologize again and retreat, but she shook her head. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "You may. You should." Within moments, staff members, relieved perhaps to see their guest no longer alone, began pulling chairs closer. Someone brought a speaker, filling the hall with soft music. The pastry chef hurried forward to slice the cake, placing plates before them. Daniel poured lemonade into champagne glasses with the quiet dignity of a man who had little but gave generously. Milo climbed onto a chair, eyes glowing as the candles flickered before him. He leaned toward Claire with childlike solemnity. "Wishes are stronger when you make them together," he said. And so they blew out the candles side by side. The paralyzed daughter of a CEO and the son of a tired but steady cook. For a moment, the emptiness of the hall no longer mattered. Afterward, as crumbs of cake scattered across the plates and Milo happily wore a paper napkin like a crown, Daniel glanced at Claire. His eyes carried no pity, only respect. The look of a man who had seen suffering and still recognized strength in another. If you'd ever like a real celebration, he said softly, not glossy, not staged, but human, come to my little restaurant on South Lake Union. I'll close the kitchen just for you. Claire held his gaze, surprised at how those words steadied something inside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an abandoned figure on display. She felt seen. She smiled, truly smiled, and answered, I'll remember that. Thank you, chef. And with that, the night that began as a wound quietly reshaped itself into the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The morning after her birthday, Claire awoke in her penthouse apartment, the wide glass windows spilling pale, light across the sleek hardwood floors. The skyline of Seattle stretched beyond her view, steel towers gleaming in the distance, but she barely noticed. The echoes of last night replayed in her mind, not the disappointment of the empty hall, but the warmth of the small boy's laughter and the surprising steadiness of Daniel's presence. It had been years since she had felt that kind of genuine human connection, untouched by money or status. She clung to the memory like someone who had been starving clings to a piece of bread. Her nurse and personal assistant fussed around her, helping her through the rituals of the morning. She wore the mask of composure she had perfected over the years, calm, professional, distant, but beneath it she felt something shift. For so long, her days had been predictable. Therapy appointments, board meetings she attended virtually, careful appearances at corporate events where her father insisted she show strength. Every moment was controlled, scripted, designed to present her as the resilient daughter of a billionaire CEO, someone still useful, still a symbol. But last night had shown her something else, how it felt to be seen simply as Claire, not as a fragile heiress in a wheelchair. By mid-afternoon, her father arrived. Richard Morgan was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed part of his skin. His presence filled the room like thunderclouds. He did not knock. He never knocked. He stepped inside, his cologne sharp, his face carved with lines of ambition and weariness. You didn't tell me your party was a failure, he said without greeting. His tone was clipped, not cruel, but dismissive, as though her birthday was just another line item on a report. Claire met his eyes calmly. It wasn't a failure, she replied. I had company. Richard paused, raising an eyebrow. Company? From whom? Everyone I invited was a no-show, despite the obscene amounts I spent on catering and entertainment. Who did you drag into the spectacle? Daniel, she said evenly, letting the name linger. The head chef. And his son. Her father's expression darkened, as if the mere thought of a man in a stained apron crossing into their world was an insult. The kitchen staff? Claire, do you understand how this looks? Do you understand what people will say if they learn you celebrated with a cook and a child instead of your peers? She felt anger stir inside her chest, slow but sharp. What peers? She shot back. The ones too busy to show up? The ones embarrassed to be seen with me now that I'm not the woman I was? Tell me, Father, what looks worse, sitting in a ballroom alone or sharing cake with someone who cared enough to stay? For a rare moment, Richard had no retort. He exhaled, turning away to the window, gripping his cufflinks as though he could twist his frustration into the metal. You're too sentimental. You can't afford to appear weak. You're a Morgan. Your name carries weight. Do not cheapen it with distractions. Claire's gaze hardened. A man who shows kindness to someone forgotten by the world is not a distraction. The silence between them stretched, brittle as glass. Finally, Richard muttered something about a meeting and left as abruptly as he had arrived. The slam of the door echoed long after he was gone. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Claire found herself restless. She turned over her father's words in her mind, the coldness of his logic, the endless pressure to perform, to appear. And then she thought of Daniel's quiet strength, of the way Milo's small voice had broken through her loneliness with the simple question, "Can we sit with you?" She made a decision she knew her father would despise. She instructed her driver to take her not to another board meeting or corporate dinner, but to a small neighborhood on the south side of the city. The streets there were narrower, the air filled with the smell of food cooking, the laughter of people who lived close enough to know one another's names. The restaurant was modest, its windows glowing with warmth. A handwritten chalkboard sign announced the daily specials. Inside, the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes created a comforting rhythm. People leaned across tables, talking and laughing, as though time itself had slowed. It was the kind of place she had not set foot in for years, and it felt almost like stepping into another world. Daniel was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, his hands moving with confident precision as he plated a dish. Milo sat on a stool nearby, coloring on a napkin with a stubby crayon, his tongue poking out in concentration. When Daniel glanced up and saw her, surprise flickered across his face, quickly followed by a smile that was genuine and uncalculated. He wiped his hands on his apron and came to greet her. "You actually came," he said. There was no awe in his voice, no reverence for her wealth or status, just simple acknowledgement. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. "I said I would." Milo looked up from his coloring and beamed. "You came!" he shouted, hopping off the stool and running to her side. He tugged at her sleeve. "We saved a seat for you." And as Daniel guided her wheelchair to the table, as the warm light of the restaurant wrapped around her, Claire realized she had stepped into the beginning of a life that was entirely her own, one that her father could never script or control. The following week unfolded like a tug-of-war inside Claire's life. On one side was her father, relentless in his insistence that she return to the carefully orchestrated image of strength and control he had built around her. On the other side was the quiet, surprising pull of Daniel and Milo, who had, in a single evening, cracked open a world she had almost forgotten existed. Her days began as they always did, her nurse helping her dress in perfectly tailored suits, her father's assistants delivering stacks of reports to review. She was expected to join video calls, to smile for photographs that would be circulated among investors, to prove that despite her wheelchair, she was still the face of Morgan Enterprises' future. But now, between those obligations, she found her mind drifting. She replayed Daniel's voice, warm and grounded, and the sound of Milo's laughter echoing in the small restaurant, as real as the clink of glasses. Richard, perceptive to even the smallest shift, noticed her distraction. At breakfast one morning, he set down his coffee cup with deliberate force. "You're losing focus," he said. "You cannot afford to drift into sentiment. I hear you've been sneaking away to the south side, dining with staff." Claire set her fork down calmly, though her heart pounded. "I had dinner with people who treat me like a human being. Forgive me if that's strange to you." Richard's jaw tightened. "You don't need them. You have everything here. Money, influence, protection. The world only respects strength and weakness." He gestured toward her chair, the word unspoken but slicing through the air like a blade. Her chest ached, but she kept her voice steady. "If kindness is weakness, then I'd rather be weak." The tension lingered long after he left, her father's words rattling through her like a warning. Yet that same evening, she found herself back at Daniel's restaurant. She told herself she just wanted fresh air, a break from the suffocating penthouse walls. But when she saw the glow of the windows and heard the hum of laughter inside, she realized it was more than that. Daniel noticed her almost immediately, and this time there was no surprise in his expression, only warmth. He came over with 2 steaming plates in hand. "I thought you might come back," he said, sliding one plate in front of her. "Roast chicken with garlic mash. Milo calls it my magic dinner." Claire smiled faintly. "Does it really work magic?" "Depends who you ask," Daniel replied, grinning. "Milo thinks it fixes everything." As if on cue, Milo bounded over, his little legs nearly tripping over themselves in his eagerness. He climbed onto the chair beside her, eyes wide. "I told Daddy you'd come back. You're our friend now, right?" The word friend hung in the air like something precious. For years, Claire had been introduced as an asset, a daughter, a shareholder, a symbol. But friend, no one had called her that in a long time. She felt something shift inside her chest, quiet and dangerous. Dinner that night stretched long past closing. They talked about small things, recipes, favorite colors, Milo's fascination with dinosaurs. And then, without planning to, Claire began to share pieces of herself. She told Daniel about the accident, about how quickly her life had changed, about the crushing silence that followed when the people she thought were friends vanished. Daniel listened without interruption, his hands still, his eyes steady. When she finished, he didn't offer pity, didn't say the usual rehearsed lines about strength or destiny. He simply nodded and said, "That must have been hell." Something about the raw honesty in his voice cracked her composure. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. She looked away, ashamed, but then felt a small hand slip into hers. Milo, watching with wide brown eyes, whispered, "It's okay to cry." Claire's heart broke and healed all at once in that moment. Later that night, when Daniel walked her to the car, his expression was thoughtful, cautious. "You know your father won't like this," he said quietly. Claire's lips curved in a faint, defiant smile. "My father doesn't own me. Not anymore." But as the car pulled away, and she caught one last glimpse of Daniel standing in the glow of his modest restaurant, she couldn't shake the knowledge that her father was a man who always got his way. And if he saw Daniel as a threat to his world, he would move mountains to crush him. That thought lingered with her, long after she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, torn between the safety of obedience and the dangerous freedom of choosing her own heart. The storm arrived sooner than Claire expected. Her father, Richard Morgan, had not built an empire by ignoring what threatened him, and by the third dinner she shared at Daniel's restaurant, the consequences began to unfold. It started subtly. One evening, as Claire wheeled into the familiar warmth of Daniel's small dining room, she noticed it was quieter than usual. The tables that had been crowded with families and regulars were now mostly empty. Daniel's smile was still there, but it was thinner, forced at the edges. When she asked, he only shrugged and said, "Slow night." "It happens." But the flicker of worry in his eyes betrayed him. The truth revealed itself the next morning in her father's study. Richard was seated at his vast mahogany desk, the skyline behind him glowing cold with morning light. He didn't look up when she entered, only slid a folder across the polished surface toward her. "Do you know this man?" he asked, his voice low, almost casual. Claire's breath caught as she opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy shots of her at Daniel's restaurant, at his side, Milo sitting beside her, all of them laughing like family. Beneath the photos was a page filled with numbers, debts, late payments, loans tied to Daniel's business. "You had him followed?" Claire asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Richard leaned back, his fingers steepled. "I protect what's mine, and you, Claire, are mine. This man is drowning in debt. He has no future, no stability, nothing to offer you except pity meals and a crumbling diner. Do you really think someone like him belongs in your world?" Claire closed the folder, anger burning in her chest. "Maybe my world is the problem, not his." Richard's eyes hardened. "You're being naive. He sees you as a ticket. Don't pretend otherwise, and if you keep running around with him, the board will see weakness. Investors will panic. Everything I've built will shake because my daughter couldn't control her impulses. It was always like this. His empire first, her humanity second. But this time she didn't retreat. She wheeled closer, her voice steady. "I don't need your protection, and I don't need you deciding who's worthy of me." Richard stood, towering over her. "If you continue this distraction, I'll make sure that restaurant of his doesn't last the month. I can bury him in debt so deep he'll never see daylight again. Do you understand me?" The threat hung heavy, filling the room like smoke. Claire didn't answer. She turned her chair and left, her hands trembling against the wheels. That night she returned to Daniel, her chest aching with the weight of her father's ultimatum. The restaurant was quieter still, and when Daniel came to sit across from her after closing, she finally spoke. "My father knows about us," she whispered. "He's trying to destroy you." Daniel leaned back, wiping his hands on a towel. His expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something fierce in his eyes. "Let him try. I've survived worse than rich men with grudges." But Claire's heart tightened. "You don't understand. He can take everything. He'll make sure you and Milo have nothing." Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers, steady and warm. "Claire, I don't care about his money. I care about you. And Milo cares about you. That's worth fighting for." For the first time in years, she felt a surge of something dangerous and exhilarating. Hope. Yet beneath it lurked a gnawing fear. Richard Morgan was not a man who bluffed, and his power was vast. As she left the restaurant that evening, Milo running after her to press a crayon drawing into her hand, a picture of her, him, and his father holding hands, Claire knew the war had only begun. And she was standing in the middle of a battlefield where love itself was both the weapon and the target. The first blow came 3 days later. Daniel arrived at his restaurant early, as he always did, only to find a notice taped to the door. A health inspection scheduled for that morning. At first, he thought nothing of it. Inspections were routine. But when the inspectors arrived, their scrutiny was merciless. They examined every corner, every shelf, every plate with a severity that bordered on personal. By the time they left, the kitchen was spotless, but they'd still managed to file a report citing minor infractions that could cost him dearly. Daniel knew immediately whose hand was behind it. By evening, the second strike hit. A supplier he'd worked with for years called apologetically, saying they could no longer deliver to his restaurant. The deal had been canceled suddenly with no explanation. Daniel didn't need one. He could picture Richard Morgan's shadow stretching into every corner of his fragile business, pulling strings with invisible fingers. When Claire arrived later that night, Daniel was sitting alone in the dim restaurant, his head in his hands. Milo was asleep in the back room, clutching his toy truck. Claire wheeled toward him and laid her hand on the table. "What happened?" Daniel lifted his head, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "Your father. He's trying to strangle me without ever walking through that door. Inspections, canceled contracts, whispers about debt. He's making sure I won't last the month." Her chest tightened, guilt rushing over her like a wave. "I told you he would. He doesn't stop until he wins." Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair. "I can fight, Claire. I've fought my whole life. But this isn't just about me. Milo depends on me. If I lose this place, I lose the one thing keeping a roof over his head." His voice cracked, raw and unguarded. "And I can't let him see me fail." Claire's throat burned. For the first time, she felt the weight of the divide between their worlds pressing down on her like a vice. In her father's skyscraper office, one phone call could destroy lives. Here in this small restaurant, a man's entire existence was held together by late nights and scraped pennies, and she was standing in the middle of the two, torn apart. That night, she returned home to confront her father again. Richard was in his study, pouring himself a drink. The air smelled of whiskey and cold resolve. "You think you can play games with me, Claire," he said without looking at her. "But this isn't about you anymore. That man is a liability. He will drag you down, and I won't watch you throw away your life for him." Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "You're destroying innocent people. Daniel, Milo, they've done nothing to you. You're punishing them because you're afraid of me choosing something different." Richard turned, his gaze sharp and cutting. "I built this empire so you'd never have to suffer, never have to beg or scrape or depend on someone weak. And now you want to trade it all for a man with nothing?" Claire's heart pounded, her anger and sorrow colliding. "He has something you'll never understand. He has love. He has honesty. And he makes me feel alive in a way your world of glass towers and empty boardrooms never could." For a moment, her father's expression flickered, as though her words cut deeper than he expected. But then the mask returned, colder than ever. "If you continue this, you'll no longer be my daughter. You'll no longer have my name, my protection, or my inheritance. Choose wisely." The ultimatum hung in the air like a noose. Claire wheeled out of the study, her chest heaving, her future unraveling before her eyes. Back at the restaurant the next morning, she told Daniel everything. His face hardened, but he reached for her hand. "Then we fight together, with or without his approval. I won't let him take you away from me." It was then that Milo woke, rubbing his sleepy eyes, and padded out of the back room. He climbed into Claire's lap without hesitation, wrapping his small arms around her. "Don't be sad," he whispered. "We're a team now." Tears stung her eyes as she held him close. In that moment, she knew her choice was already made. Whatever battles lay ahead, whatever storms her father would unleash, she had found something worth losing everything else for. And for the first time in her life, that felt like freedom. The breaking point came faster than either of them imagined. A week after Richard's ultimatum, Daniel arrived at his restaurant to find the front windows shattered, glass strewn across the floor like ice. The smell of smoke lingered in the air. Though the fire hadn't caught, someone had tried to burn the place down, but been interrupted. His heart raced as he pushed open the ruined door and rushed inside. Nothing was stolen. The attack wasn't about money, it was about fear. A warning. By midday, the news spread across town, wrapped in poisonous whispers. Customers who once came faithfully now stayed away, afraid of scandal. The weight of suspicion pressed in from every corner. Maybe Daniel owed debts. Maybe he'd crossed the wrong people. None of them dared to say Richard Morgan's name, but Daniel knew. Claire knew. Her father's war had reached a new, merciless level. That evening, Claire came in her wheelchair, her hands trembling as she looked at the wreckage. Milo ran up to her and hugged her waist, his wide eyes filled with confusion. "Why would someone hurt Daddy's restaurant?" he asked. Daniel crouched down beside his son, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Because sometimes people who are scared try to hurt others. But we'll fix this. Together." When Milo went into the back to play, Claire broke down. "This has to stop. He's destroying you piece by piece. And if he ruins this place, what will you do?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'll find another way. I've lived through worse than broken glass. I won't let him win by making me walk away from what I've built." Claire grabbed his hand, her eyes blazing. "Then let me fight with you. He wants me to be silent, obedient, ashamed. But I'm not that girl anymore. If he thinks he can scare me back into his world, he's wrong. I'll stand in front of cameras, reporters, anyone who will listen, and tell them the truth about what he's done." Daniel's first instinct was to protest. She was already vulnerable, already caring more than anyone should. He didn't want her to become a target. But when he saw the fierce determination in her eyes, he realized this wasn't weakness. It was her strength, the strength her father had tried to crush for years. The next day, Claire did exactly what she promised. With Daniel beside her and Milo clutching her hand, she sat before a room of journalists at a small local press gathering. Cameras clicked, lights burned hot, and Claire's voice shook at first, but then steadied, growing stronger with every word. "My name is Claire Morgan," she began, "and I am the daughter of Richard Morgan. My father taught me to believe that money and power could solve everything. But I have learned that love, kindness, and resilience mean more than any fortune." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "When he saw me choose happiness with a man he deems unworthy, he retaliated. Not by hurting me directly, but by destroying the livelihood of an honest man, Daniel Carter, and endangering his little boy." The room erupted with murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, some clearly stunned by her defiance. Claire continued, her voice unflinching. "I am here to tell you that my father does not control me, nor will he silence me. I am not afraid of him anymore." Daniel watched from the side, his chest swelling with pride and awe. He knew how much it cost her to stand there, to expose herself to the world, yet she did it. For him, for Milo, for herself. When the conference ended, the questions shouted from reporters chased them into the street. But Claire felt lighter than she had in years. Her secret prison had been shattered, but victory was not without cost. That night, Richard called her. His voice was low, cold, and unfamiliar. "You've humiliated me," he said. "You think you've won something today? You've only declared war, and wars have casualties." Claire sat frozen, the phone trembling in her hand. For the first time, she sensed that her father was no longer just manipulating behind the scenes. He was preparing to destroy everything she had left. She hung up and turned to Daniel, who was already watching her with concern. "He won't stop now," she whispered, her throat tight. "He's going to come after you harder, maybe even Milo." Daniel's arms closed around her, fierce and protective. "Then let him try. He can break windows, he can pull strings, he can whisper lies. But he'll never break what we have. Not now, not ever." Claire buried her face in his shoulder, clinging to the warmth of his embrace. Yet deep down, she knew the storm was only beginning. And it would test them more brutally than anything before. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. Only 2 days after Claire's press conference, Daniel received an envelope with no return address. Inside were glossy photographs, grainy, taken at night, but clear enough to recognize. Milo's small figure on the playground. Daniel closing the restaurant at dusk, Claire being wheeled out of a rehabilitation center after therapy. Each image carried a single typed word at the bottom. Vulnerable. His blood ran cold as he spread the pictures across the counter. It was no longer about intimidation. It was surveillance. A message that someone was watching every step they took. When Claire saw them, her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the photos. "This isn't just a warning anymore," she whispered. "He's telling us he can reach us whenever he wants." Daniel wanted to storm across the city and confront Richard face to face, but Claire stopped him. "He wants you to act on impulse. That's how he'll trap you. Please, for me, stay calm. We'll find another way." Her eyes were pleading, but her voice carried steel. The next blow came swiftly. A false article appeared online, headlined with Daniel's name. It painted him as a violent man with a criminal past, accused of assault and theft. Though the story was fabricated, it spread like wildfire through blogs and local news outlets, poisoning his reputation. Loyal customers canceled reservations, and some whispered cruel things when he passed by. Daniel's restaurant, once his pride, was now sinking under the weight of lies. Late at night, Daniel sat in the empty dining room, staring at the broken remains of his livelihood. The chairs were stacked, the kitchen dark, the hum of the fridge echoing like a taunt. He felt hollow. "Maybe your father's right," he muttered when Claire wheeled in, her face pale but determined. "Maybe I'll never be enough. Maybe I should have kept my distance. At least then, Milo wouldn't be dragged into this mess." Claire's heart clenched at his words. She rolled closer, gripping his hand. "Don't you dare believe that. You are enough. You've always been enough. My father can throw money, lies, even threats. But he doesn't own my soul, and he will never touch the love I feel for you." But Daniel's silence betrayed his doubt. He had fought so long to be strong, but the relentless attacks were crushing him. That night he lay awake, listening to Milo's soft breathing from the next room, torn between the instinct to protect his son and the desperate pull toward Claire. The breaking point came the following evening. Richard himself arrived, his presence like a shadow swallowing the small apartment where Daniel and Milo lived. He stood in the doorway, flanked by two suited men. His gaze landed on Claire, who had insisted on staying with Daniel for safety. "You think you've won because you shouted into a few cameras?" Richard's voice was ice. "You think this mechanic can give you the life you deserve? Look around you, Claire. This is squalor. You're my daughter, not some charity case chained to a failure." Claire's eyes flashed with fury. "I am your daughter, but I am not your property. And Daniel is not a failure. He is more of a man than you'll ever be." Richard's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, and a flicker of rage distorted his face. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then understand this. If you stay with him, I will destroy him completely. He won't just lose his restaurant. He'll lose custody of his son. I have the power to make him look unfit in court. Think about Milo crying in some foster home, all because you were selfish." The words landed like a dagger. Daniel felt his chest tighten, fear for Milo overtaking every other emotion. He wanted to lunge at Richard, but one of the men blocked his path. Claire's breath caught, her nails digging into the arms of her wheelchair. When Richard finally left, the room was thick with despair. Daniel turned to Claire, his face pale, his hands trembling. "If there's even a chance he could take Milo from me, I can't risk it. I can't." Tears filled Claire's eyes, hot and unstoppable. "Don't say it. Please, Daniel, don't." But he looked at her with broken resolve. "I love you, Claire, more than I've ever loved anyone. But I can't gamble with my son's life. If leaving you is the only way to keep him safe, then I have no choice." Claire's heart shattered. She tried to speak, to fight, but her throat closed around the words. For the first time since they met, Daniel walked away. Not because he didn't love her, but because love wasn't enough against the monster her father had become. That night, Claire lay awake in her apartment, tears soaking her pillow. Her father had won, for now. But deep inside, something stronger than grief began to burn. A fire of defiance, of resolve. If Richard thought she would surrender, he was gravely mistaken. Because if Daniel had to let go to protect his son, then she would be the one to fight back harder, louder, and more fearlessly than ever before. The city square was packed that morning, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward as reporters buzzed with anticipation. A press conference had been called, not by Richard, but by Claire herself. For days she had been silent, retreating behind the walls of her penthouse after Daniel left, her heart raw and shattered. But she had not been idle. With every ounce of strength, she gathered evidence, testimonies, and witnesses. Years of secrets her father thought were buried forever. And now, under the weight of 1,000 eyes, she was ready to burn his empire to the ground. Claire wheeled herself up to the podium, her navy suit impeccable, her hair styled perfectly, but her eyes burned with fire. The air around her pulsed with an intensity no one expected. When the camera zoomed in, there was no trace of the broken woman left behind in tears, only steel and resolve. She began to speak, her voice steady measured, slicing through the chaos with razor clarity. She spoke of corruption hidden under corporate deals, charities that were nothing more than money laundering machines, board members silenced through threats and bribes. She named names. She cited dates. She produced files projected on the massive screen behind her, bank records, contracts, signed letters. The evidence was undeniable. The crowd erupted in disbelief and outrage. The press scribbling furiously, live broadcasts spreading her words across every network in the country. The mighty Richard Hayes was suddenly exposed, naked in his crimes. He had spent decades building a fortress of influence. But his daughter, the one person he underestimated, had set fire to its very foundation. Richard appeared at the edge of the square, flanked by security, his face pale but livid. He pushed his way through, shouting over the reporters, "This is slander! She's a bitter cripple who doesn't know what she's saying." His words cut through the air, cruel and desperate. Gasps rippled through the crowd at his venom. Claire did not flinch. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm but searing. "The world just heard you call your own daughter a cripple, father. If that is how you speak when the cameras are rolling, imagine the cruelty behind closed doors. I am not bitter. I am not broken. And I am no longer afraid of you." The crowd exploded with cheers, a wave of voices rising against the man who had long held them in fear. The press turned their microphones toward Richard, demanding answers, hurling questions about bribes, money trails, and now his blatant cruelty. For the first time, Richard Hayes had no script, no shield. He shoved past, his empire unraveling with every second. As he was swallowed by the chaos, Claire's eyes searched the crowd. And there he was. Daniel stood at the edge, Milo perched on his hip, his face etched with awe and pride. For weeks he had kept his distance, terrified of losing his son. But seeing Claire like this, fearless, unyielding, magnificent, ignited something inside him. He realized she was not just the woman he loved. She was the one person who could truly rewrite his world. After the press conference ended, when the cameras had been packed away and the reporters scattered, Daniel approached. Milo squirmed down, running to Claire, who reached for him with trembling hands. The boy hugged her fiercely, whispering, "You were amazing." Tears filled her eyes as she kissed the top of his head. Daniel stood in front of her, hesitant, guilt and longing warring in his chest. "Claire, I thought I had to walk away to protect Milo. I thought love wasn't enough against your father. But today, you showed me that love is stronger than fear. You showed me you'd fight not just for yourself, but for us, too." His voice cracked as he lowered his head. "I'm sorry I doubted. I'm sorry I left." Claire reached for his hand, her fingers closing tightly around his. "You left to protect your son. That isn't weakness, it's love. And I fought today for the same reason. Because I love you, because I love Milo. Because I want a life with you both, no matter how hard it gets." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick with everything they had endured. Then Daniel pulled her into his arms, careful but desperate, holding her as though he would never let go again. The city roared around them, the world shifting under their feet. But in that embrace, they found the unshakable truth they had been searching for. Together, they were unbreakable. Weeks later, Richard Hayes was indicted, his empire dismantled piece by piece. For once, the headlines celebrated not his wealth, but his downfall. And in the quiet corners of the city, far from the chaos, life began anew. Daniel reopened his restaurant, not flashy, but warm, filled with laughter, the scent of herbs and garlic filling the air. Claire often sat at a corner table with Milo beside her, working on her laptop, her laughter more frequent, her eyes brighter. Milo, once shy and cautious, flourished in the presence of a family that finally felt whole. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city in gold, Daniel slipped a small box onto Claire's table. She opened it, her hands trembling, and inside was a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no extravagance, just a promise. Daniel knelt beside her chair, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I can't give you millions, Claire, but I can give you forever. Will you marry me?" Her tears sparkled as she whispered, "Yes." And as Milo clapped and the restaurant erupted in cheers, Claire realized something her father never could understand. True wealth was not in power or money, but in love, family, and the courage to fight for them. In my view, the ending of this story carries a deeply human and universal truth. Money, influence, and control may build walls, but they cannot create love, compassion, or genuine happiness. The paralyzed daughter, who once symbolized loneliness despite her wealth, found the warmth of life not through riches, but through the sincerity of a single father and his child. The CEO father's downfall wasn't his power. It was his blindness to what truly matters. What makes the finale so powerful is not just the romance between Claire and Daniel, but the way their love became a catalyst for healing, for standing up against manipulation, and for proving that family is built from the heart, not contracts or social status. To me, this conclusion is shocking in the best way, because it flips the usual narrative. The millionaire doesn't save anyone. She is the one who is saved. And she isn't saved by power, but by humanity. It's a reminder that even in a world driven by status and appearances, what endures is kindness, courage, and the quiet strength of people who dare to love despite the odds.